does not seem to be responding to treatment.
And then, if it's not responding to treatment, how bad does it get for us?
Well, it's 30% of the world economy, so it affects demand here. You've also got the problem that we can't have a fiscal stimulus. Gordon gone around the world urging everybody else to do it because we can't. And on top of that, if we do get a recovery where America does not drive the world out of it, it's going to be a strange recovery. We don't know what a recovery looks like led by China. I'm very sceptical we could have one. If we did have one, you would see the end of globalization as we know it, because it would inevitably be some kind of regional competition. It's just going to alter the shape of the world economy unless something happens in Washington that turns some of these graphs even just slightly back upwards.
Paul, thank you. Now, first of all, Joseph Stiglitz, as well as being a leading economist, you're also a player in this, and the financial recovery package was very much something that you had been promoting. Why is the American administration struggling so hard with it?
Well, the problem is, and Barney Frank tried to explain this, things would have been worse without it. But that's very hard to explain to somebody. So, yes, our unemployment rate now is approaching 10%, but it almost...
Did you expect it to be as high? And did you expect, when Ben Bernanke says that it's going to be that way till 2011, did you expect that?
Yes. And that was one of the reasons why I thought they should have had a bigger package, and they should have designed it markedly different. They should not have had tax cuts, because, pointed out, with this overhang of debt, uncertainties about unemployment, people are going to hoard that money and not spend it. It might be good for their balance sheet, make them feel more secure, but it's not going to stimulate the economy and lead to recovery. The second point that they should have done was to recognize that there's going to be an enormous shortfall of revenue for the states. Now, the states in the United States all have balanced budget frameworks, which means when the revenues go down, they have to either raise taxes, which is a negative stimulus, or cut expenditures, which is a negative stimulus.
But would the states not have then been quick to benefit from all the money for infrastructure, this idea of the shovel at the ready?
Well, the point is, infrastructure projects, even if they're shovel ready, take time. And particularly, they were very sensitive to the issue of good projects. They wanted to have good procedures. All of that takes time. And so you have this curious situation where the states are laying off teachers, universities are having to cut back money. We are reducing our investments in the most important capital, our human capital, our people, while we are beginning to prepare for infrastructure.
But would a bigger package have solved that?
It would have helped, clearly.
Dr. Philippa Margam, you are disagreeing with that. I mean, do you believe that the package was right? What do you say to the outline? Would we be in a worse position in America if it had not been a package?
I have to say I agree with that. Look, when the private sector contracts, the public sector has to expand to compensate. We know that. What we disagree about is how. How is the money spent? Where is the money placed?
So it shouldn't have gone in tax cuts at home for people then to pay off their debt. It should have gone to businesses.
No, in fact, my view is that the only thing that can lead the recovery is the creation of new jobs, which is going to be by small businesses. And we should have given them tax cuts to encourage them to create new enterprises. Because now is a time of transformation, innovation, and risk-taking. That's how you get out of a slowdown. Washington does not lead you out of a slowdown. Nameless entrepreneurs lead you out of a slowdown.
So you think, in fact, the major problem is what people in America are looking at and going, oh my goodness, this is big government, this is not what we do.
Personally, I think that's exactly why the president's public opinion poll ratings are starting to fall, because they're objecting to that.
Americans it's like an alien concept to them, isn't it? Shoveling money in both to states and also in a very strange way into their pockets, because they feel that there's something that they don't quite get about this.
Well, what's confused people is that large amounts of money have gone to the banks.
Yeah.
And the banks, we've seen what they've done with that money. They paid out bonuses. Bonuses for what? For record losses. They paid out dividends. You shouldn't be paying out dividends.
And they're shoring up the reserves, trying to build reserves.
Exactly. And they're not doing the lending. So what they see is this huge program, which is not the stimulus program, but is the bank, you might call it recovery, bank bailout program, appears to be a complete bust.
So therefore what happens?
They're confusing the two issues.
Yeah, but what happens then? Because if Barack Obama is not going to get a second stimulus package through, and presumably you want more of the Keynesian medicine.
Well, by the way, Keynesian medicine can also be well-designed tax cuts for businesses. Mm-hmm. I don't disagree with Pippa at all. That one of the things I said, that if you're going to have a tax cut, it should be linked with spending. So if firms increase their spending on investment, they can get a tax cut, and we would help finance it. Particularly important in the current context where many of the banks are not lending, and having more resources on their own is an important substitute.
But we have a situation now where for the first time people are more worried about the deficit, aren't they? I mean, that's their primary concern now.
Well, and I think that's a fair concern. And what government didn't do was say there is a price for throwing this much cash at the banking system, at the economy. And the price is, all of you in the public in the U.S., but also here in Britain, you will have to work longer. You will retire later. You will have less quality of living. And I think if people had understood what the trade-off was, they might not have been so quick to say this needs to happen.
Well, can I qualify that? Because whether you borrow, the consequences of borrowing depends on what you do with the money.
Yeah.
If you take the money and you invest it, then the economy can even be stronger. Mm-hmm. If we invest in people, they become more educated, we invest in technology, they become more productive, then the economy is stronger. Any firm, we look at the balance sheet, we look at the liabilities, what it owes, but we will also look at the assets.
Why is Barack Obama failing to sell that idea to people?
I don't know. Part of it is that 1/3 of the stimulus went for tax cuts that were intended for consumption, and they've increased the deficit, but haven't increased the assets.
Because in a sense, what maybe what was not factored in here was human nature, which is that you don't go out and spend when you're in trouble, and you don't go out and spend when your house price is plummeting through the floor, and you don't go out and spend when you think your job's at risk.
But not only that, we don't want Americans to continue to engage in reckless expenditure behavior. We want them to rethink their personal finances, get their house in order. The question was, at what speed do they compress their consumption?
So I'd like to know from each of you what you think President Obama should do now. I mean, there's 2/3 of the stimulus package not spent for a start. That's one thing. But what should Barack Obama do now?
Well, I think he has to make a case for a second stimulus and make a case that it will be better designed, which means, if necessary, tax cuts that are oriented to investment in business.
Do you think that's going to fly?
It's dreadful disagreeing with the Nobel Prize winner, I have to say. But I don't think another bout of capital thrown at this is actually going to fix things. I think it will make it worse. I do think the indebtedness problem is genuine and serious.
What about Paul Mason's point there, that actually if America doesn't move ahead soon, then China and India will lead a kind of partial recovery.
I think it's absolutely essential, and I think what we really need to do is make it clear that we make some mistakes. The bank bailouts, the way we designed them, were a mistake. We won't be making that mistake going forward. We're not going to be throwing money down the drain at the banks. We're in fact going to demand something, really, if we give anything more to the financial sector to make sure that we are protected. So put that aside and say we're going to do that better, and say, look at this notion, if we create a liability, we're going to be creating assets. And we're going to make our economy stronger. So let's talk about what kind of assets. Assets in the private sector by stimulating investments, assets in the public sector, human capital, and eventually infrastructure investment of the kind that we need, but also technology, universities, clean, retrofitting our economy for global warming, lots of things that we clearly need. I mean, the irony is, you're describing the capacity utilization. Here we have a situation in America and in the world where we can list huge amounts of unmet needs, and yet we have
He's got to take the
unutilized
voters with him,
resources.
hasn't he, on this? He's really got to take the voters with him.
Right, and the voters are philosophically not inclined to see government taking over more and more of enterprise. And I think it's one thing to start to take over the banking system and how it's run, but now taking over the healthcare system and how it's run is beginning to create a kind of philosophical backlash.
But the real point is the private sector failed, and we have to recognize that. You know, all of this rhetoric about the private sector, it failed. The financial system didn't do what it was supposed to do.
Thank you both very much.